What if a child's question could shake the foundation of the British monarchy? What if one innocent sentence, whispered in private, revealed a silent struggle no royal press release could hide? Today, we peel back the curtain on an unseen tension shaping the future of a crown. Studio, stay with us, because by minute 2, you'll see why a child's words might change the course of a dynasty forever. It began with a single innocent question, the kind of question only a child could ask. Far from the glare of flashing cameras, away from meticulously choreographed balcony waves and precisely timed greetings, Prince Louis leaned toward his father in a quiet corner of royal life. In that hushed moment, he asked something no one in the palace had ever anticipated. "Papa, why does Camilla keep taking Mommy's things?" There was nothing rehearsed in his voice, no strategy, just a child seeing patterns the adults had worked so hard to conceal. And in that fleeting moment, the monarchy, a centuries-old institution built on ritual, symbolism, and silent rules, shuddered. What followed was not a scandal, but a rupture in the carefully maintained illusion of unity. The power of that question did not stem from its volume, it was whispered, but from its unguarded innocence. It bypassed years of polished diplomacy, cut through smiles perfected for state banquets and sliced through handshakes measured down to the last millimeter. In private, where titles loosen and tradition presses heaviest, truth has a way of surfacing without warning. Louis did not speak as a prince aware of optics. He spoke as a son protecting something sacred. And in that simple expression of wonder, he revealed a tension that had been quietly fermenting behind the palace's polished facade. King William, caught in the fragile limbo between devoted father and future sovereign, reportedly froze. A lifetime steeped in defending tradition had never prepared him for answering a child's naked, probing honesty. How does a man raised to uphold the institution respond when that very institution unsettles the tender heart of his own child? His instinct would have urged reassurance, a gentle reply to soften a narrative too sharp for a young boy's shoulders. Yet behind William's calm exterior, a quiet storm brewed. As heir to the throne, he understood every nuance of ceremonial transitions. As a husband, he saw the emotional toll, invisible yet profound, that these invisible shifts exacted upon his wife. As a son, he could not easily challenge an authority that now defined the crown. In that moment, 3 loyalties collided within him, and none offered a simple answer. But what exactly had Louis meant by Mommy's things? The phrase refused to be taken at face value. It was not a literal inventory of jewelry or wardrobe. It lingered because it hinted at something deeper, a sense that attention, influence, and emotional space had shifted within the palace's invisible hierarchy. In royal life, nothing is merely an object. A brooch can declare allegiance. The reassignment of a charity can signal a shift in influence. Even the placement of one's seat at a ceremony can redraw invisible lines of authority. If a 5-year-old could sense displacement, perhaps the symbolism had grown too loud to ignore. The tension between Catherine and Camilla had always existed in a realm most people never see, a world of subtle gestures, shared stages, and carefully calibrated public composure. On the surface, there were joint appearances and measured signs of solidarity, synchronized smiles, seamless transitions between engagements, and the kind of polished diplomacy the world had come to expect from royalty. But beneath that sheen was a truth far less visible. 2 women were orbiting roles that, while appearing harmonious from afar, overlapped in legacy, influence, and narrative gravity. Catherine, poised, luminous, and widely seen as the future of the monarchy, embodied promise and continuity. Camilla, seasoned, resilient, and equally anchored in her own right, represented the present power within the crown. In such close proximity, friction didn't need sharp conflict to exist. It thrived in nuance. It lived in the unspoken, the barely noticeable shift in expression, the subtle realignment of influence. And now, through the unfiltered observation of a child, the unspoken had finally been articulated. The palace might dismiss the moment as a misunderstanding, a passing remark from youthful imagination, but history has shown that seismic shifts often begin with what others choose to overlook. Institutions don't fracture overnight. They adjust, drift, and realign, quietly, until one day the adjustment feels irreversible. Louis's innocence did not accuse, it acknowledged. He had perceived something adults had persuaded themselves was imperceptible, and that alone made the question dangerous, because if a child could perceive a pattern, perhaps the changes were no lun. Subtle. In royal life, roles don't simply exist, they resonate. They carry layers of meaning that go far deeper than any headline could capture. Titles are not ornamental, they are architecture. Influence is not aesthetic, it is force. And when influence shifts, even subtly, it recalibrates everything around it. Catherine's silence, her unwavering calm under scrutiny, only fed speculation. Was this strategic restraint, a long game grounded in patience and loyalty to public duty? Or was it diplomacy enforced by the invisible hierarchy she had vowed to uphold? Her composure never cracked publicly, but strength does not always announce itself. Sometimes it lies quietly beneath the surface, unspoken, uncelebrated, yet undeniably present. And William, the heir forged by privilege, duty, and personal history, found himself navigating terrain that was far more emotional than constitutional. He understood reputation. He knew how to manage narratives with precision. He grasped how a monarchy survives scandals, abdications, and public scrutiny. But this internal shift was different. It was not a public feud. It was something subtler, something that threatened the emotional harmony within his own home. Because when symbolism shifts too quickly, it unsettles more than protocol, it unsettles identity. If a child could sense that something once familiar was now unclear, perhaps the pattern was no longer invisible. What had Louis been noticing? Why had no one stopped it? Children do not invent palace politics, they observe, they listen, and they draw conclusions adults often assume they cannot. For months, subtle changes had occurred behind the gilded doors. Portraits relocated, not dramatically, but to places that drew the eye elsewhere. Charitable engagements reassigned under different leadership with new emphasis. Jewelry historically associated with Catherine appearing at highly symbolic moments. Patronages once whispered as stepping stones toward future legacy now showcased differently. Each alone was unremarkable, but collectively they suggested intention rather than happenstance. To the outside world, they might seem like coincidence. To those steeped in palace nuance, they hinted at repositioning, reinvention beneath the surface that refuses to fracture openly. In that context, the tension between Catherine and Camilla was less about conflict and more about territory, influence, legacy, emotional space, and purpose. Catherine embodied evolution, youthful, modern, widely admired, a future shaped by sensibility and global resonance. Camilla embodied endurance, resilience forged through decades of scrutiny. Again and again, she endured skepticism, criticism, and resistance. Her authority was not new, it was proven. Now, as queen, she stood not merely present, but positioned. In royal life, positioning is everything. William stood between two worlds, the present crown and the future it would someday bequeath. His loyalty to his father bound him to the institution's continuity. His devotion to Catherine anchored him to a future shaped by empathy, modern resonance, and quiet strength. Navigating that dual allegiance required restraint that bordered on self-sacrifice. He could not afford a public conflict. He could not appear divided. But silence does not erase tension. Silence internalizes it, and internalized tension has a way of surfacing in unexpected ways. Often, it reveals itself not through public spectacle, but through the subtle emotional currents that ripple beneath composed facades. Sometimes it comes in the voice of a child. Behind every serene smile and composed wave, there were conversations that never reached the cameras, dialogues that took place in quiet rooms, far from public scrutiny. These were not arguments. They were negotiations with identity, legacy, and emotional truth. William and Catherine's private moments were likely not dramatic eruptions. They were measured, reflective, heartfelt. They would have asked questions about influence, about space within the institution, about how they protect their family's unity while navigating the shifting architecture of power. These were not questions of ego. They were questions of legacy, a legacy built on trust, identity, and emotional foundation, not mere titles or ceremonial symbolism. For Catherine, strength was not loud, it was a stillness deep enough to endure. But silence, especially when layered over disappointment, becomes heavy, not explosive, not dramatic, just heavy. And heaviness presses inward, shapes emotional response, and lingers where words fail. In today's hyperconnected era, public perception travels faster than palace spokespeople can issue statements. Social media dissects gestures, cameras freeze moments, audiences interpret the subtlest shifts in expression as narrative. A handshake held a moment longer, a glance softened or sharpened, a distance perceived where proximity once existed. These become symbols because the world seeks meaning in detail. And the children, symbols of continuity, feel emotional currents before adults admit them. Louis did not interpret power dynamics, he responded to emotional rhythm. His question wasn't analytical, it was instinctive. To him, mommy's things was not about possessions, it was about belonging, a child's instinctive measure of what feels safe and what feels uncertain. William heard more than words. He heard echoes of his own past, childhood years he spent amid invisible tensions adults never fully explained. He heard the weight of expectation clashing with the promise of protection. He recognized that once questions are spoken aloud, they cannot be unasked. They linger. They demand clarity. This was no longer about jewelry or patronages. It was about authority, trust, and the emotional landscape of succession. The monarchy's strength has always rested on the illusion of seamless unity, a narrative crafted through generations. But internal equilibrium must be felt before it can be projected. When emotional trust is unsettled, even quietly, the entire institution feels it. Catherine's rising global appeal and Camilla's established authority were no longer quiet undercurrents. They were narratives the world could feel. I saw harmony, but perception now interprets nuance. Supporters rallied emotionally around Catherine's promise. Others affirmed Camilla's resilience. What might once have remained palace rumor now rippled through global conversation. The monarchy's greatest strength was its image of unity, not perfection. Yet unity must be experienced internally before it can be projected externally. When internal equilibrium falters even slightly, narrative becomes harder to control. In the modern era, perception moves faster than palace strategy. Social media dissects gestures before official statements arrive. Comparisons circulate. Speculation magnifies nuance into storyline. Catherine represents evolution, youth, relatability, renewal. Camilla represents endurance, legacy shaped by survival. Both narratives are powerful and valid, yet their proximity creates inevitability of contrast. And in that contrast, public perception begins to choose sides. History shows that emotional fractures, once exposed, do not need dramatic headlines to leave lasting scars. They begin quietly through unresolved tension, unaddressed imbalance, and silence that deepens into suspicion. William knew this. He had studied earlier chapters of royal conflict not as gossip but as cautionary tales. He understood how silence left unchecked can calcify into fault lines, dividing families and institutions alike. Now he stood at a crossroads. Generational patience has limits, and the innocence of a child's question had pulled back the curtain on emotional imbalance that could no longer be ignored. William could not undo what Louis said. He could not pretend he did not feel its impact, because once truth is spoken aloud, once it pierces the illusion of unity, silence ceases to be refuge. It becomes decision. This was never about jewelry or rooms. It was about succession, symbolism, and survival. It was about legitimacy, not just of crowns, but of emotional trust. And if trust erodes inside the family, what happens outside it? The institution can survive tension. It always has. The question now is whether it could afford another emotional rupture in an era where transparency is demanded and trust is fragile. The public's investment in William and Catherine's family elevated the stakes. They were not just heirs, they were symbols of continuity that felt accessible and hopeful. Any perceived threat to that continuity, even symbolic, triggered swift emotional response. The possibility emerging was not dramatic rupture but redefined boundaries. Influence might be clarified, roles might be subtly recalibrated, symbolism could be carefully redistributed. These adjustments would not be framed as retreat or victory, they would be presented as unity, because unity was the only narrative the institution could afford. Yet behind that narrative would lie something significant, a recognition that emotional undercurrents cannot be ignored indefinitely without consequence. The monarchy had adapted through history, but adaptation requires awareness. Louis's question was not loud but undeniable. It exposed imbalance in its purest form. Children articulate what adults rationalize away. They speak without calculating fallout, and sometimes their honesty forces evolution that politics alone would delay. The long-term recalibration of influence may already have been in motion, subtle but irreversible. This is the paradox of power within a family dynasty. Authority must be preserved, yet emotion must be respected. The future must be secured, yet the present cannot be undermined. Walking that line demands extraordinary discipline, but discipline without empathy becomes rigidity, and rigidity, history shows, is far more dangerous than honest recalibration. And so the monarchy arrived at a moment suspended between preservation and transformation. Nothing explosive had happened publicly, no scandal erupted, and yet everything felt slightly different, because once innocence exposes imbalance, silence is no longer a safe refuge. Decisions must follow, adjustments must occur, and legacies must be protected with greater intention than ever before. Sometimes the smallest voice inside a palace carries the loudest echo. And this echo had only just begun. If this narrative opened your eyes to the unseen tensions shaping one of the world's oldest institutions, smash that like button. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because we're just getting started. Comment below, what do you think Prince Louis really meant? And share this video with someone who loves royal drama. This story is far from over.